Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and I hope that your week is going well. The purpose of this video lecture is to talk for a few minutes about everyone's least favorite aspect, or most everyone's least favorite aspect of writing, and that concerns grammar. And anytime you talk about grammar or you mention the word grammar when it comes to writing, you can watch people just kind of shrivel up inside themselves. You can kind of look at people's facial expressions and watch them grimace. And you can look at a lot of people just kind of look away and look to the left and look to the right and think, oh no, we're going to be talking about grammar. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that for many of us, our experiences with grammar and with learning grammar and understanding grammar came from our experiences maybe in elementary school and in middle school, where we had to memorize all of those grammar rules. We had a grammar textbook that we had to do exercises out of. We spent a lot of time answering worksheets, memorizing prepositional phrases, memorizing all the semicolon usage rules and all the comma usage rules, and really just doing everything we could to make grammar an exercise of memorization and sort of drill and practice. And for that reason, a lot of people don't like grammar. I can remember myself being in junior high back before there was middle school, and I had my 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Cyrus, made us diagram sentences. A lot of you probably have no idea what that even is, but you can Google diagramming sentences and find out the painstaking process of taking a sentence and breaking it down into its disparate parts so that you know what the purpose and function of every single word in a particular sentence or paragraph was. And we did that once a week, and we kept this big old 3-ring notebook just full of diagrammed sentences. And it was painstaking, and it took and turned grammar. It took a long time, but it turned grammar into almost like solving an algebra equation. And so for a lot of us, that's our experiences with grammar. And then we sort of step away from grammar as we go through school. We do a lot of grammar in elementary school, and we do a lot of grammar in middle school or junior high. Then when we get to high school, it's all literature and essay writing. And so we get kind of away from grammar. We don't spend as much time on grammar. And so the purpose of this video lecture is just to talk a little bit about grammar and its importance and its purpose and some things to keep in mind with regards to grammar. Now, this is not a grammar class specifically. We are not going to spend several weeks worth of module exercises and activities talking about grammar, and I'm not going to ask you to memorize the grammar rules. I'm not going to ask you to memorize all 15 different usages of commas and how they're used properly in sentences. In fact, we could go out and ask someone, anybody in business or industry or anybody famous or anybody who does a lot of writing on a regular basis about those same rules that I was just talking about, those grammar rules, those semicolon rules and all of that. Most people aren't going to know what they are. But what people will know and what people will understand is if it's used incorrectly in a sentence. So we want to talk a little bit about grammar and kind of what this is and why it's important for us to remember some rules associated with grammar. The great thing about grammar is we can always go back in our drafts. We can always go back in rough drafts of essays, rough drafts of discussion board posts, rough drafts of smaller writing assignments and tweak the grammar and fix it up and make sure that it's correct and make sure that it is the way that we want it to be as we go through the editing and proofreading process. And we're going to talk later in the semester when we get to our essays about the difference between revising, editing, and proofreading. Oftentimes people use those words interchangeably, but they're 3 very different things. When we talk about grammar, we're talking about sort of the editing, proofreading part of our writing. And so it's not something that you should worry about. It's not something that you should be afraid of. And please don't let the experience that maybe you had in school taint your impression or your perspective of grammar. I have students a lot of times will tell me, I'm so afraid of using a comma in a sentence because I had Mrs. So-and-so in English class, or I had Mr. So-and-so in English class, and every time we put a comma in the wrong place, it was 10 points off of our paper. Well, we're not going to worry about that so much in this particular class. We are going to pay attention to grammar. We want to make sure that our grammar is correct, but we don't want it to paralyze and make us fearful of writing and expressing our ideas and supporting our thoughts and opinions and perspectives in writing. But I did want to take just a moment to share my screen with you and just talk for a few minutes briefly about grammar, why grammar matters, and why this is something that we want to keep in mind as we think about looking at writing and looking at writing maybe from a holistic perspective and everything that goes into writing. When we talk about grammar, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're talking more than just grammar rules, and we're talking more about more than just about, all the comma usage rules or the four sentence rules or the parts of a sentence or all the verb tense rules or all the prepositional phrases and all of that. All of those are components of grammar, but we're talking more about what grammar does and how grammar works within the sentences and the paragraphs and the essays that we are constructing, not only for this class, but for other classes that you may take as a college student here at Ole Miss, and also the kinds of documents and correspondence you're going to produce as a professional when you finish your degree and you get out into the workforce. So when we talk about grammar matters, we're talking more than just about grammar rules. But I wanted to share something with a man named Jeffrey Jittimer. He was here a few years ago at Ole Miss, and he was speaking to some students, some business students and finance students. And this just sort of came up in the conversation when he was talking about writing and workplace writing. And he said, your grammar is a reflection of your image. Good or bad, you have made an impression. And like all impressions, you are in total control. So that's one of the main takeaways we want to think about when we look at grammar, is that it's more than just memorizing all of those rules and knowing where to put all the commas in the right places. It's about making a first impression with your writing, and it leaves a first impression with your writing if you have a good command of grammar, or if you've taken the time to go back and make sure that your grammar is as strong or as capable as it needs to be. And one of the great things, like Jeffrey said in his discussion, was that you're in total control of grammar. You can use as many commas in a sentence or a paragraph as you want to. You can use as many semicolons as you want to in a paragraph. You can use as many prepositional phrases in a sentence or paragraph that you want to. You're in control of the grammar that is present in your writing. And a lot of that comes from your voice. A lot of that comes from your background in terms of how you think and how well read you are and how you write and the voice that you imbue in your own writing. In terms of what types of sentences that you like to write. I'm a comma writer. I like to use lots of commas in my sentences and in my paragraphs and in my longer writings. Some people, because they've had those bad experiences in school, they're scared to death of commas, and they put their hands up and they try to use as few commas as possible. Is there a right or wrong way to do that? Well, grammatically speaking, yes, but there's no fast and hard rule for this essay has to have these many commas used, or this type of writing has to have this many past participles used, or this kind of writing has to have these many semicolons. There is no hard and fast rule. It's all about what you're comfortable with and what your style is as a writer. But you do need to keep in mind that grammar does make an impression, and you want to make sure that as you look at grammar holistically as it applies to your writing, you do want to give it some attention, and you do want to pay attention to it. You do want to make sure that your writing in all situations demonstrates the best level of grammar possible. So here's some reasons why grammar matters. As we think about moving forward in the semester with our content and with our writing, keep in mind that worded writing, that language and that sentences, and that the impression we create with our language and our sentences is purposeful. It should be purposeful. It should have a reason for existing. It should have an audience that it's targeted to. We're going to talk more about that later. But it should also be professional and easily understood. You want to make sure that anytime you are writing something and anytime someone is reading something that you are writing, particularly if it's about an experience that you're familiar with more than someone else. So if it's a personal narrative, or it's a research essay where you've been spending, several weeks researching a topic really in depth and looking at material that's out there and what articles are out there and what interviews are out there and what kind of secondary source material is out there on a particular topic, you want to make sure that when you sit down to structure that piece of writing, it's purposeful, it's professional, and it's easily understood. Your goal as a writer is to make sure that the reader gets from line 1 in paragraph 1 all the way to the last line in the last paragraph, if that's the conclusion paragraph or something else. You don't want them at any point to feel confused, to feel not connected to what you're writing, or to be so distracted from word choice issues or grammar issues or sentence structure problems that they get to the end of a sentence and they have no idea what it is that you've written. And then they're typically going to either set that piece of writing aside, or they're going to start to make judgments about you, not only as a writer, but as a thinker and as an individual. So you want to make sure that your writing is purposeful, professional, and easily understood. One of the ways we get those 3 points across is through grammar and having a good understanding of grammar usage. Also, something to keep in mind with grammar, it allows the reader to step away from that particular piece of writing with a clear understanding of what your purpose was and what your intent was. Was that piece of writing intended to persuade? Was that piece of writing intended to tell a story? Was that piece of writing an attempt to define something or to provide perspective or depth to something? All of those issues concern intent, and you want to make sure that by the time the reader gets to the end of that particular piece of writing, they have a pretty good understanding of what your intent was. And we can talk, and we will talk more about tone and mood and other kinds of issues as we move through the semester when we get into the essay writing portion of the course. But we also want to keep in mind that grammar helps us in that regard. Grammar helps us communicate our intent. Grammar helps us communicate the story that we're telling. Grammar helps us communicate the definition we're trying to explain. Grammar helps us articulate the statistics and the details and the quotes that we're using in our research writing. All of that connects right back to grammar. And so you do have to have an understanding of kind of what it is and how those grammar rules and how those grammar marks and punctuation marks associated with grammar work together. And then when someone looks on the other side of that, if you have writing that demonstrates poor grammar, it's often associated with really laziness to some degree, with rushing to some degree, and it could be just a general lack of disregard for the importance of it. And you don't want a reader to walk away with that impression from your writing. You don't want them to say, nah, you know what, I can clearly tell he sat down or she sat down and wrote this essay at 4 o'clock in the morning and it was due at 11 o'clock. Or he sat down and wrote this essay at 4 p.m. and it was due at 11:59 p.m. because clearly he didn't take time to think about grammar. He didn't take time to go through the proofreading and editing process and make sure his grammar was as strong and as sound as it could be. And so I just don't really know if this person was serious about this topic that he or she is writing about. Those are the kind of things a reader is going to say to you. And this is particularly important if you ever take a class in business and technical writing, where you are writing documents that are going to be disseminated out to a larger audience, out to maybe a broader audience than just your classmates or myself or a smaller group of people. That's going to be read by tens of hundreds of thousands of people. Really important. You don't want someone to walk away from your piece of writing and think, yeah, this writer just didn't care, just didn't take the time, just kind of rushed through this, flew through this assignment, flew through this piece of writing. And I can tell because I don't know exactly the rule for why that comma is not where it is or why it's not used correctly, but it makes that sentence totally fall apart. And that's the impression you don't want a reader to have. You want to make sure that your grammar reflects your best writing, but also your best thinking as you get to that point. And also good grammar helps us create those thoughtful, polished sentences that make a really strong impression, that show we have an accuracy not only to our writing, but that we have been thorough as the writer. We have gone through those steps of revising, editing, and proofreading to make sure that the piece of writing that we are sharing with someone else is the very best it can be. So this is sort of the bigger picture issues of grammar. Again, not getting down into those 15 comma rules or not getting down into those 6 semicolon usage rules, but just the kinds of impressions people make when grammar is used incorrectly and some reasons that you want to think about grammar being important to your writing. So something else I would say also with this related to that is you want to make sure that your grammar is sending the correct message. And I've talked a little bit about this as well. Grammar is often tied into a word choice. And oftentimes we use grammar to accentuate or to highlight certain word choices, certain definitions, certain explanations in our writing. And if we have our commas in the wrong place, or if we have our grammar usage mixed up, it's not going to lend the power and the impact to that particular word, idea, or phrase that we're looking for. And we'll talk more about that both in the module this week, but also later on in the semester as we get into the essay portion of the course. So you want to make sure that every word in your sentence is powerful and it's communicating the kind of message that you want it to convey. And our grammar rules and our grammar usage helps us do that, helps us draw attention to important details, concepts, and ideas that we want the reader to understand. So if we use it incorrectly or we have some problems with regards to grammar, the reader's going to be distracted by that and not necessarily the words that we're trying to communicate. And also one of the things that grammar can do in terms of sending a correct message or conveying a correct idea is it sometimes will make the reader have to reread that sentence or reread that paragraph to try to figure out what it is that you're trying to say. And I talked about that a moment ago about why that can be problematic. Again, your goal is to get the reader from word 1 in line 1 to the last word in the last paragraph. And if they have to stop and reread sentences over and over again because they're just not quite sure what it is you're trying to convey, because you've got grammar mistakes to the level of message confusion, then you've lost your reader, and the likelihood that they're going to stay engaged with that particular piece of writing goes away. So you want to make sure that you use grammar as effectively as possible so that the reader is not distracted from the message or the meaning or the purpose or the focus of your piece of writing, your essay, your paragraph, or whatever it might be, and get confused. You want them to stay focused and engaged throughout the entire process. And something else to keep in mind, and again, we do this when we're learning grammar, and oftentimes we do this from our experiences or lack thereof with grammar, is that writing is not about, wowing the reader or wooing the reader with flowery language, or sometimes these used to be called 50-cent words, the words that you find in a thesaurus. That and complex sentence constructions, that's not going to be always impressive to a reader. You just want to get your point across using the most efficient means. And I sometimes have seen students overcorrect with grammar. They feel like they're pretty comfortable with the comma usage rules, for example, and so they put commas in absolutely everywhere throughout their paper or throughout their piece of writing. And sometimes that works, and sometimes maybe they're writing a piece of writing where all those commas aren't necessary. I have to do that a lot in my own personal writing. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm sort of a comma-happy writer. I like lots of commas in my sentences and paragraphs. But sometimes, depending on what I'm writing and who I'm writing it for in terms of an audience, they don't need all those complex compound sentences that commas oftentimes create. Those sentences where you have several independent and dependent clauses strung together to convey an idea. Sometimes that's not needed. Sometimes a simple declarative sentence will do it. Sometimes a simple explanatory sentence will do it. Sometimes an exclamatory sentence with an exclamation mark at the end will convey the idea that I need to convey for the reader and for the audience, and it involves a lot less commas and a lot less clauses and a lot less words. So don't feel like if you are comfortable with certain elements of grammar, or if you feel like you start to get the hang of it, you may not always need those complex grammar constructions or those grammar rules to communicate your message. You can write an entire paper, believe it or not, and not use one semicolon and convey a very strong perspective, a very strong purpose, a very strong thesis without having one semicolon used at all in a particular essay. So sometimes we go the other way with grammar, and we're comfortable with it, or we have a general understanding of it, and then we feel like, okay, I've got to sort of show off. I got to show everything I know about this particular grammar construction, and that's not always the case. Sometimes simple is better, sometimes clearer is better, and sometimes you don't need those grammar rules creating these long, complex, complicated sentences that take up 3 or 4 lines of text for one sentence to convey something to a reader. Sometimes simple is better. So I just wanted to keep you aware of that as well. That's one of the reasons it's important to think about grammar and to pay attention to it, is we can overcorrect and go the other way with it and get ourselves into a situation where we're using it to the point that it's detrimental. It draws away from our writing because maybe that particular grammar construction or rule is not needed for that particular situation. So those are just some things I wanted to say to you about grammar in this video lecture. Again, this is not a grammar class. We are not going to spend module after module after module each week going over the different grammar constructions. We can talk about grammar. There's some grammar assignments in this particular module that I'm asking you to complete, because these are the most common grammar problems that I have seen students experience when they enter college and when they take Writing 101. These are kind of the common sort of sore thumbs I have seen over the years students have trouble with. And you'll notice as we work through those modules, I'm less concerned about can you memorize the rule and can you recite the definition of XYZ grammar term, and more about application, more about can you see it in a sentence and can you see why the particular incorrect usage of the grammar construction is a problem. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on, not just in the module activities for this week, but throughout the semester as well. So keep in mind, grammar is important. It is a part of the way we communicate. It does help us convey meaning. It does keep our writing purposeful. It keeps our writing professional, and it keeps our writing organized and helps us make a positive impression. But at the same time, we don't need to be afraid of it. It's not something that we want to slow down our momentum in writing, and it's not something that we want to keep us from accomplishing what we're trying to communicate in writing. Remember, grammar falls under that bottom tier, one of those last things that you deal with in the writing process, which we'll talk about later on as well. It's down near the bottom. It's step 7 or 8. You deal with grammar kind of in step 7 or 8, and there's a reason for that. That's because everything that you do above that is really what you want to strive for in terms of detail and excellence in your writing, and that is having a clear thesis, and that is having good supporting evidence to support your ideas, and that is supporting evidence from secondary sources if you're doing some kind of a research project. All of that kind of takes the top tier of the writing process, and that's why grammar is down here at the bottom. Not that it's important. All 8 steps in the process are important, but we don't want to become obsessed with it. We don't want to let it make us afraid, and we don't want it to keep us from moving ahead with the writing that we are doing and working on, because we're so afraid that, oh my gosh, if I put this comma in the wrong place, I'm going to get 10 points taken off. So that's kind of how we're going to look at grammar over the course of the semester. And I'm happy to talk about grammar at any time. If you have some questions or concerns about grammar, you're really concerned about commas, you haven't dealt with commas in a long time, I've got all kinds of resources I'm happy to share with you at any time on some of those issues, those specific grammar issues, and how to use them in context. But I think you'll see the assignments in the module this week are more for you being able and me being able to see that you recognize when grammar constructions and when these grammar rules and issues are dealt with and used improperly in a sentence. I want you to be able to spot those and have a sense of, how can I make that sentence better? How can I take out that incorrect grammar construction and make that particular sentence better? So that's all I have to say about grammar. I hope everything is going well. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns, or if you need any help with the activities in the module this week concerning grammar, and I'll talk to you again soon.